better place with my own two hands. Make a kinder place. Oh, with my own two hands. With my own two hands. With my own two hands. I can make a peace on earth with my own two hands, and I can clean up the earth, Lord, with my own two hands, and I can reach out to you, oh, with my own two hands, with my own two hands, oh, with my own two hands. I'm gonna make it a brighter place. I'm gonna make it a safer place. I'm gonna help the human race. With my own two comfort you with my own two hands, but you got to use your own two hands, use your own two hands, use your own two hands, and with our own two hands. Two hands, with my own two hands. I'm gonna make it a brighter place. I'm gonna make it a safer place. I'm gonna help the human race. Oh, make it a brighter place. I can hold you and I comfort you, but you got to use. Use your own. Oh, use your own, Lord.
Please take your seats. The program is about to.
Good evening. I'm Logan McClure-Davda, TED's Head of Impact.
And I'm Manoush Zamarodi, host of NPR's TED Radio Hour. Thank you. Yay!
Celeb.
I know.
Celeb.
Totally. We are so psyched to be partnering with Bloomberg Green and so thrilled to have you here with us and live stream. Hello to you. Thank you so much for being here.
So Countdown is TED's first issue-specific initiative dedicated to accelerating solutions to the climate crisis. Our mission is to advance the global climate conversation by shining a light on the critical climate issues of our time and by sharing the solutions that are going to help us achieve net zero, hopefully sometime soon. Here's more.
The answer is clear.
There's really no question in the science.
We already have most of the solutions we need.
We have hydropower, we have solar power, we have wind power.
There's no real alternative to halting climate change.
So what is the holdup? While more people have woken up to the urgency of this moment, that concern isn't translating into enough action. We need to respond more boldly, more quickly, and rise to this challenge together. Since 2020, TED Countdown has been gathering together the world's greatest thinkers, scientists, entrepreneurs, business leaders, artists, researchers, and storytellers to ignite the world's imagination by shifting to a new narrative of hope and urgency.
We're going to improve the quality of life.
I am so excited, like genuinely so excited.
We'll be the most sustainable industry in the world.
By accelerating action on and investment in specific climate solutions.
We're going to have to both deploy and invest in the now, as well as invent the new.
And by building a more united climate community, grounded in radical collaboration that delivers results.
We'll work better if we work together.
Different points of view can add to the collective wisdom.
Ask any person who's built change over time. It happens through relationships.
We have to have open ears because we have so much to figure out.
Exponential change is happening.
Do not be vulnerable to despair. We are going to do this.
Let your elected officials know that this is important to you.
The future is ours to imagine and create. Join us. Let's act now together.
So since launching TED Countdown in 2020, we've reached millions of people around the globe with hundreds of stories of the science of climate and the solutions we need to get there, to build a better future. The work we do, the connections we spark, play out in a variety of ways, many very visible, but others behind the scenes.
Yeah, and tonight is going to build on all of that. So you are essentially attending a mini TED conference Thank you so much for being part of the show. We're going to be putting out these talks over the next few months. They will be featured on NPR's TED Radio Hour. And tonight, really, you are going to be spending time with some of the world's foremost experts on all kinds of things. We are going to dive into the current state of climate. We are going to go big picture on the climate. We're going to talk about solutions for methane. We are going to understand the interplay of climate and democracy. We're also going to have some music, so lots to come.
So we're midway through the most decisive decade for climate change, and the choices we make now are going to determine our future. This is a moment for taking stock, for deepening our understanding, and for finding renewed agency. So where exactly are we in the climate trajectory, and how do we actually forge a path forward? Our first speaker is here to share where we stand a decade after the Paris Agreement. We are thrilled to welcome back to the TED stage, Johan Rockström.
We Earth system scientists and climate scientists are getting seriously nervous. The planet is changing faster than we have expected. We are, despite years of raising the alarm, now seeing that the planet is actually in a situation where we underestimated risks. Abrupt changes are occurring in a way that is way beyond the realistic expectations in science. 15 years back, I introduced the planetary boundary framework, the scientific framework with the 9 Earth system processes that determines the stability, the resilience, and the life support on planet Earth. 10 years back, the world signed the Paris Climate Agreement. Almost 5 years back, we entered the decisive decade where our choices will determine the future for all generations on planet Earth. Where are we on this journey halfway into this decade? I will give you a scientific State of the Planet report, the most objective assessment that science can give today. And it starts here. We've reached 1.2 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise, the warmest temperature on Earth over the past 100,000 years. We have just scratched on 1.5 degrees Celsius as an annual mean in 2023. But what worries us most is this. We are starting to see an acceleration of warming over the past 50 years, 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade from 1970 to 2010, but then from 2014 onwards, it abruptly jumps up to 0.26 per decade, and if we follow this path, we will crash through 2 degrees Celsius within 20 years and hit 3 degrees Celsius by the year 2100, a disastrous outcome caused by us humans. But it's not only carbon dioxide. Any parameter that matters for human well-being and our economies look the same. Here you have it, linear change up until the 1950s. We go into the great acceleration, and this is what we're seeing across overconsumption of fresh water, the 6th mass extinction of species, over-eutrophying our freshwater systems with nitrogen and phosphorus, all of it undermining the stability of the planet. Now, as if this was not enough, we are seeing that this is now causing impacts across the entire economy. We're seeing bigger and bigger invoices being sent by the Earth system onto societies across the entire world in droughts, floods, heat waves, disease patterns, human-reinforced storms, scientifically attributed to human-caused climate change. 40 degrees Celsius of life-threatening heat across all continents occurring in 2023. 52 degrees Celsius, an average temperature hitting the over 1,000 who lost their lives at the Hajj pilgrimage in June in Mecca. 3 times higher climate change risks now attributed to our cause of climate change. 2023 up to 12,000 deaths, $200 billion of cost, just in the US up to $100 billion. This is seriously causing economic costs. We have scientifically in the past shown that this could cost a few % of global GDP of the climate impacts caused by us. I can tell you that the latest scientific assessment is what you see on the screen here. An 18% loss of GDP by 2050 if we now follow the current path. This is equivalent to $38 trillion of loss per year in 2050. it's starting to hurt, both in human social costs and in economic costs. And this is happening at 1.2 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise, and we're following a pathway that takes us to 2.7 degrees Celsius in only 70 years. And we've had a 10,000-year period where our civilizations have developed, where we've had an enormous privilege of a planet at 14 degrees Celsius plus minus 0.5 degrees Celsius. That's the Holocene since we left the last ice age. And if you look 3 million years back, we never exceeded 2 degrees Celsius. That's the warmest temperature on Earth during the entire Quaternary. The coldest point, minus 5 degrees Celsius, ice age. I call this the corridor of life. Is it surprising that we scientists are getting really, really nervous? But it's more. It's so much more than this. The first issue is buffering capacity. The second is the risk of crossing tipping points. And both are moving in the wrong direction. Buffering capacity is the Earth system's ability to dampen shocks and stress. Like, for example, soaking up greenhouse gases in intact nature on land and in the ocean. And so far, Mother Earth has been so forgiving. Here we have the evidence. What you see here is the hockey stick of fossil fuel burning in red and deforestation in yellow. Is it this tremendous climate forcing that has caused the 1.2 degrees Celsius climate crisis so far? The answer is no. 53% of the carbon dioxide from fossil fuel burning and land system change have been soaked up by intact nature on land and in the ocean. It's only the blue sliver you see here, which remains in the atmosphere, causing the climate crisis so far. The problem is we have more and more scientific evidence of cracks in this system. Let's start on land. Land absorbs 31% of the carbon dioxide from our greenhouse gas emissions. We have more and more scientific evidence across so much research that the boreal forest in Canada or the temperate mixed forest in Germany and Russia are starting to lose their carbon uptake capacity. Did you know that the latest science shows that the Brazilian part of the Amazon rainforest, planet Earth's richest biome on terrestrial land, has already tipped over and is no longer a carbon sink. It is today a carbon source. It's no longer helping us. But as if that was not enough, what really worries us today is the ocean. The ocean absorbs 90% of the heat caused by human-induced climate change. You have the observations on this screen. This is well understood, but what really worries us is what you see here. This is the latest data. This is the latest data on sea surface temperature across the ocean. What you see here is from 1980 until today, how gradually the ocean surface just gets warmer and warmer. It's actually warming all the way down to 2,000 meters depth. This is well understood in science. It's a deep concern. It's well represented in the climate models. We understand it. Then suddenly, in 2023, something happens. The temperatures just go completely off the charts, 0.4 degrees Celsius outside of the warmest temperature in previous years. What's happening? We admittedly must be honest here, we do not know. El Niño is certainly partly to blame, but cannot explain it all. 2024, it just continues. What is happening? We do not know, but the candidate number one is the energy imbalance caused by us humans. In 1 year alone, the heat equivalent to 300 times global electricity use is absorbed in the Earth system. Is it what we see on the screen here, an ocean that is starting to lose resilience? An ocean that is at risk of releasing heat to the atmosphere and self-amplifying warming? We do not know, but one thing is for certain, the ocean is sounding the alarm. Reasons for concern? Yes. We are now at a point where we are forced to ask the following question. Are we at risk of pushing the planet out of the basin of attraction, the stability of the planet where we've been since we left the last ice age, the extraordinarily stable Holocene state? And if we pushed ourselves outside, drifting away unstoppably towards a hothouse Earth where we get self-amplified warming and losing life support on Earth. What could take us there? Well, we know it. It is if we cross tipping points. Big systems like the Greenland ice sheet, the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, the coral reef systems, the Amazon rainforest, are tipping element systems. Push them too far and they will flip over from a desired state that helps us to a state that will self-amplify in the wrong direction, going from cooling and dampening to self-amplifying and warming. A rainforest tips over to a savanna state. Now, we have now mapped the 16 tipping element systems which are now scientifically cataloged that regulate the climate system. These 16, and you see the 5 in the ground zero on planet Earth in the Arctic, are connected via cascades through the ocean, particularly via the AMOC, the Atlantic overturning of heat in the ocean, all the way down to Antarctica. These are big biophysical systems that we all depend on, global commons for the stability of the planet. The question is, at what temperatures are they at risk of tipping from helping us to becoming self-amplifying foes? Well, for the first time, we have an attempt to answer that question. What you see here are the 16 tipping element systems on the y-axis, and in red you see the uncertainty range, the best estimates in science. Darker the red, the higher the risk of tipping. It's the temperature levels at which they're likely to cross the thresholds. The average temperature at which they are likely to tip is the yellow circle lines you see here. What this tells us is the following. 5 of these 16 are likely to cross their tipping points already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, abrupt thawing of permafrost, losing all tropical coral reef systems, and collapse of the Barents Sea ice. Just the two ice sheets hold 10-meter sea level rise, which would be unstoppable on the long term. Now, sure, there's scientific uncertainty here, as you see from these graphs. But there's one red thread in science for humanity, in the scientific message, and it's this. The more we understand of the Earth system, the higher is the risk. And here is the proof. This is 5 IPCC assessments, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 30 years of scientific advancements. Here again you see risk assessment, darker the red, higher the likelihood of causing irreversible change in the climate system. 30 years back, the risk was put at 5 degrees Celsius of tipping, and coming down to current state of science, the risk is set at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. We are in the midst of a danger zone today. But it can be even worse than that. Let's go to the Amazon basin. Again, the richest terrestrial ecosystem on land. Climate science estimates the risk of the Amazon rainforest tipping over irreversibly to a savanna at 3 to 5 degrees of global mean surface temperature rise. A really high temperature, unlikely even to be met over the next 70 years. But if we lose forest cover, the risk is that the system can tip already at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius if we lose more than 20 to 25% of forest cover. So that's a very dangerous combination. Where are we today? We are at 1.2 degrees Celsius global mean surface temperature rise and 17% of deforestation. We are very close to a tipping point in the Amazon rainforest. Very close. What shall we do to avoid these unmanageable outcomes? Well, the IPCC is clear on the pathway. To stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius, to avoid crossing tipping points, we need to operate, to navigate within the global carbon budget that gives us a chance of holding 1.5. What remains for us is only 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide that we can continue emitting to have a 50% chance of holding 1.5. We emit today 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, giving us 5 years at current rate of emission before we've consumed the budget. We are seriously running out of time. And the pathway for a safe landing is also well studied and understood. You have it here. Bend the curve of emissions immediately and follow a path where we reduce emissions by at least 7% per year for a safe landing and a net zero world economy by 2050. But it's more than that. We also know that even if we succeed with this, we have already loaded the atmosphere with so much greenhouse gases, with so much climate forcing, that we inevitably face a period of overshoot. We must now be prepared for a very likely breaching of the 1.5 degrees Celsius planetary boundary on climate somewhere between 2030 and 2035. in 5 to 10 years' time, and then have at best a 30, 40-year period of overshoot before we can come back to 1.5 by the end of this century. We would exceed with 0.1 to 0.3 degrees Celsius the 1.5 limit, meaning up to 1.8 degrees Celsius. What does this tell us? Well, I can tell you there are two main messages. Message one, buckle up. We know for certain, 100% certainty, that this means more droughts, more floods, more heat waves, more human-reinforced storms, more disease during one generation's time. 2023, the warmest year on record, will be looked back upon as a mild year. Message two, why would the planet come back to 1.5 after overshoot? Well, the answer is very simple. The health of the planet must be kept intact. We must continue having a planet that can absorb 50% of the carbon dioxide. We must have a planet that crosses no tipping points. We must have a planet that remains healthy and keeping heat intact in the ocean. That is why we need planetary boundaries. The planetary boundary framework that defines the 9 Earth system processes that regulates the stability and resilience of the entire planet. Climate, biodiversity, nitrogen, phosphorus, land, fresh water, air pollutants, and chemicals. Now, that is the challenge. To summarize that, there is no 1.5 degrees Celsius delivery on the Paris Agreement by only phasing out fossil fuels. We also need to come back into the safe operating space of the nature-based biodiversity, planetary boundary, all the planetary boundaries of nature. This means that science is clear. The window is rapidly closing. But there is still some light in the window. We actually have evidence that we've reached a pivotal point, not only in terms of risk, but also in terms of opportunity to transform the world towards a safe and just future for humanity. Linear change is no longer an option. The only option is exponential change. We know that the only currency that matters is speed and scale. We also need to become stewards of the entire planet. We need to now recognize from local to global level that we're all so intertwined that we must govern the entire planet. I know that is very daunting, but what choice do we have when on the line is the future of our children on planet Earth? And we have the solutions. We know that solving the planet crisis is not utopia. It's not fantasy. We have the solutions for a secure, stable future for humanity. What are those transformations? Well, we know them. It's a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. It is a transition towards circular business models. It is transitioning towards healthy diets from sustainable food systems. And it's not only halting loss of nature, it's also scaling the regeneration and restoration of marine systems, soils, forests, and wetlands. We have solutions for all of these. Just take green energy, which today is cheaper than fossil fuel-based energy. It's our choice that we're facing today. Now, I was nervous already in 2020 when we entered this decisive decade and had to cut global emissions by half by 2030. Halfway into this decade, the road is steeper than ever. It's steeper than ever. This is what really, really concerns us, that we have a situation where we now need to move so fast. And I've been standing on stages like this so many times, sharing the dire scientific diagnostic. But still, I just told you that I do conclude that there is still some window open. There is a light in the tunnel. And you may ask, what is it that makes me able to continue to be a realistic optimist in this situation? The most dire situation, I must admit, in my whole professional life. Well, actually, I promise this is an honest statement. There are so many positive items as well. The most important one in my mind is that we have ample evidence that citizens across the world, a majority of them, care about nature and climate. They trust climate science, they're concerned about climate change, and they want solutions. And the second key factor is that we have so much evidence today that the solutions are not only available, but if we implement them, we get a more healthy, stable, secure future with the jobs and the economies that can compete and provide livelihoods into the future. This means, dear friends, that solving the planetary crisis is not only necessary, it is possible, and we all win if we succeed. Thank you very much.
Whoa, okay, Johan, I just want to follow up on the end. You travel the world sharing this incredibly upsetting data, dire message. I want to ask a personal question. How do you sustain yourself on a daily basis? Because I think a lot of us are thinking, I don't know if I can listen to this. It's so deeply disturbing.
Well, it's a very important question, and I must admit that it's a bit of a roller coaster. There are ups and downs, undoubtedly. I really mean it when I say that I've never been as nervous as I am today, particularly because we're actually losing it, even though there still is a chance. What is that keeps me at least above surface is actually interactions like this with let's say, communities, alliances of people who really want change, but also increasingly engagements with particularly business leaders and also communities. But, there are at least policymakers in Europe that I feel really want to move in the right direction. But we get response very often from actors that seriously now understand that the planet is at risk and that we need to move in the right direction. And I could go on for another hour talking about the solution space, how we are, at double-digit numbers in the exponential rise of electric mobility and solar voltaics and wind farms. And, the food challenge in the world is solvable, and we all get healthier if we succeed. So there are, we're working so much in combining the risk assessment with the solution space.
Okay. Johan Rockström.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that 19% number of GDP. Let's continue to follow the money as we go through this session and try to fix things, because boy, do we need it after getting that message. Historically, capitalist economies have pursued profits at all costs. But the question is it possible to cut carbon pollution without killing markets, without killing competition, innovation? Our next speaker thinks it is. Please welcome to the stage author and senior climate reporter for Bloomberg News, Akshat Rathi.
I was at a climate protest, and I saw a poster that said in big letters, "Burn capitalism, not coal." Now, how many of you agree that to tackle climate change, we should stop burning coal? Raise your hands. Almost all of you. And how many of you agree that to tackle climate change, we should burn capitalism? There are a few hands, but not as many. I'm a journalist and I write about climate solutions. And when I ask this question of people, I get the full range of answers. From those who say that the system that got us into this mess can never get us out of it, to those who say that the only answer is to unleash market forces for the innovations we need. But who is right? I wanted to find the answer for myself. So I started on the rooftop of my childhood home in India. I wanted to get solar panels for my parents. It took 2 days to get quotes, 2 weeks to have those shiny devices up on the roof, ready to capture the sun's energy. The payback was quick. Electricity bills fell, and my parents have recovered the investment in 5 years. For the next 15 years, they can enjoy solar power for free. So, what has capitalism got to do with it? Well, India did not invent the technologies that go into solar panels. Even today, India manufactures only a small fraction of what it deploys. And yet, a country with less than $3,000 of income per person per year is able to benefit from what is now one of the world's cheapest sources of energy. This has happened because profit-seeking companies want to sell all of us more and more solar panels. But it has happened because governments created that market through subsidies and regulations. We know the more we build, the cheaper it gets. And it's not just the story of solar. Between 2009 and 2019, the price of solar fell 90%. Wind, 70%. Lithium-ion batteries, 85%. This is what I call climate capitalism. The climate emergency is forcing governments and businesses to change how capitalism works, to use its forces for creating the solutions we need, rather than making the problem worse. And look, it's not happening everywhere or at the pace at which we need. But there are still companies that are profiting from pollution. However, in country after country where I've had a chance to report, I've found that a combination of people, policy, and technology, when they come together, climate solutions do work. Now, the primary motivation to deploy these solutions does not have to be tackling climate change. Other pressing issues such as air pollution or energy security or global competitiveness can garner even more support. How exactly? Let me tell you the story of Wan Gang. You've probably never heard of him, but he has done more for the global rise of electric cars than Elon Musk. Wan was born in China. He trained as an auto engineer before moving to Germany and working for Audi. There he saw the lifestyle that Germans lived and realized that perhaps Chinese people may never be able to experience it. That's because in 2000, China burned about 1 barrel of oil per person per year. Germans burned 12 times as much. So he made the case to the Chinese leadership that the country needed to work on an alternative and that he was willing to lead the charge. So he was given a chance to work on a government program. Wan's team, in a period of 8 years, built hundreds of electric cars and buses that were used at the Beijing Olympics. In those same 8 years, the country's oil bill ballooned and its cities became globally infamous for air pollution. But Wan had shown that an alternative could work. If China could scale the manufacturing of electric cars, air pollution would be cut, oil imports would be cut, and most importantly, China would create a new industry that could compete with other countries. So Wan was made the science minister, and the government started giving out tens of billions of dollars in subsidies for the manufacturing of electric cars and lithium-ion batteries. The government also started putting regulations to make it harder to buy fossil fuel cars. Even today, if you're in Shanghai and you want to buy a gasoline-powered car, you have to enter a lottery and win it. If you want an electric car, you can just go to a showroom and buy one. The Chinese government provided direction, but it was the practitioners of capitalism that made a small electric car industry into the global giant that it is today. One of those investors was Warren Buffett. He invested in a little-known company then called BYD. Today, BYD sells more electric cars than Tesla. Now, you might think what China did cannot be replicated by democracies. But as it happens, China took inspiration from the paragon of capitalism, the USA. Throughout the previous century, the US has used the instruments of government to redirect investments toward national priorities. Take the semiconductor industry, the reason why California is home to Silicon Valley. It was created with generous contracts from the Department of Defense. It's also a similar case for biotech, for airlines, for the internet, all of them have fingerprints of the government from its birth. In fact, China's electric vehicle policy is a modified version of California's zero emissions vehicle mandate. That policy was crucial in keeping Tesla afloat by providing subsidies. That, by the way, is George W. Bush in a hydrogen-powered electric bus in California in 2006. But now that China has a lead on all sorts of green technologies, the US is being forced to catch up. The Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022 is one response. It will see the US government provide hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies towards all kinds of solutions, from green hydrogen to heat pumps. That will be multiplied by matching private investment. But climate capitalism isn't just about putting government subsidies to work. That's because the climate crisis is the greatest market failure of all time. Governments around the world have allowed corporations to pollute for free. And all that pollution is causing damages to all of us in the form of climate impacts, health inequalities, dislocation of communities. In some parts of the world, leaders are starting to correct that mistake. Europe has put a price on pollution and created legally binding targets. That has helped the continent cut its carbon footprint faster than any other. It's also changed how businesses operate in Europe. The Danish Oil and Natural Gas Company was founded in 1972. For 40 years, it dug up fossil fuels. Then Denmark adopted a carbon price and a climate law, and suddenly its business model became implausible. Today, you know that company as Ørsted. It transitioned away from fossil fuels starting in 2009, and it has become the largest developer of offshore wind power. But let's be clear. This hasn't been a smooth ride. There just aren't as many success stories as the world needs. That's because the climate challenge is really complicated. India has an ambitious renewables goal, but it's falling behind. Europe has seen job losses because its carbon price has been too high, that has caused some industries to shut down and move to other parts where there isn't a carbon price. And China's emissions last year rose despite a record clean energy build-out. For climate capitalism to work, governments and businesses need to be flexible. They need to recognize when there are policies that require certainty, but if they're not working, then they must be changed. Governments need to work with business to figure out what are the regulations that would work. India is now doubling down on solar with batteries because it's seeing rise in electricity demand. Europe has introduced a carbon tariff that's going to put a price on pollution, on imports. That will level the playing field for domestic industry and stem job losses. And some experts think that if China can continue its clean energy build-out at the same pace, its emissions may have peaked last year. Now, what's remarkable is that some businesses are seeing that it's in their self-interest to act on climate change with or without regulations. So far, we've looked at big economy-wide changes. Now, let's think about something as simple as ice cream. You would think that during a heat wave, an ice cream maker will turn big profits selling lots and lots of ice cream. But heat waves are becoming so extreme that people are choosing to stay at home instead. At the same time, smallholder farmers, that are the supply chain of ice cream makers, are seeing their productivity fall. That's because of intense heat, drought, floods. It means the cost of making ice cream is going up. It's a double whammy. Lower sales, higher costs. Increasingly, businesses are recognizing that there are fewer profits to be made on a planet on fire. So let's go back to that poster. Is the answer to tackle climate change to burn capitalism, not coal? I hope the examples I've shared show that the problem isn't capitalism, but how it's being allowed to run. We only have a few decades left to get to zero emissions. The fastest way to get there is to change capitalism. How to do it? Through a combination of people, policy, and technology. Dedicated people, smarter policies, and cheaper technologies. That is how you'll get businesses to focus on the solutions the world needs. That is how people like my parents in India and all of us around the world will get access to those solutions. And that is how the world will finally stop burning coal and all other fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshat. So let's build on this. Why is it that despite so much growth and innovation, we're still grappling with challenges like poverty, resource scarcity, and pollution? Here to discuss the root of the problem in our economic system is our next speaker. Tonight, she speaks at personal title and not for her employer, Schneider Electric. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to sustainability researcher and economist, Gaya Herrington.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Let's contemplate the word enough, because I think it will play an important role going forward. When I watch the news or scroll my feeds, I keep coming back to the same questions. Why, despite all our knowledge and innovation, do problems like poverty and pollution keep plaguing humanity? Why, despite astonishing advances in renewable energy and resource efficiency, is fossil fuel use at an all-time high, as is our global ecological footprint? And why, despite being responsible for the main part of that footprint, have rich countries been experiencing stagnating, if not decreasing, well-being? I'm a sustainability researcher with a background in econometrics, and I believe the answer lies in the fact that solving poverty, caring for nature, or fostering well-being is not the ultimate goal of our current economic system. Its goal is growth. Many take this for granted, but growth wasn't considered a moral goal for most of history. It was only officially measured around the middle of last century through GDP. It then shifted into the core of our economic thinking, and from there into policy making and our collective psyche. Growth became synonymous with progress. Things went fast after that. Extinction rates went up, resource use and waste exploded. Some warned early on about the dangers of exponential growth on a finite planet. In 1972, a team of MIT scientists created a first-of-its-kind world model consisting of over 200 interconnected variables. With it, they analyzed the question I mentioned earlier, why problems like poverty and pollution persist. They published a book on their findings called The Limits to Growth, in which they warned that continuing the business-as-usual growth pursuit would lead to societal breakdown, setting in around now. Breakdown doesn't mean the end of humanity, but a steep decline in well-being nonetheless. The book was a bestseller, but you may have never heard of it. The authors were derided as doomsayers, and their message over time buried. A few years back, I compared their now decades-old projections with what's happened since. I found empirical data closely aligning with the model's business-as-usual scenario, which shows growth grinding to a halt around 2040 or so, followed by steep declines in things like food production and well-being. My analysis also revealed that this breakdown could be avoided by letting go of the growth pursuit and redirecting resources to meet human needs and protect nature directly. This indicates that what we do in the next few years will determine our well-being for the rest of this century. And this now or never moment in history is up to us. Technology by itself will not save us, despite aspirational talks of decoupling, the idea that the economy can grow without resource use and pollution growing along with it. There's no decoupling. Certainly not for a full impact on the Earth. Raw materials consumption has been around 1.2 kilograms per dollar GDP for 2 decades, while biodiversity loss, water scarcity, plastic pollution are all worsening. But even just considering carbon emissions, which per dollar GDP have decreased, sufficient absolute decoupling, which is what we need, is nowhere in the data. Our choice isn't whether to keep growing or not. It's whether the end of growth will come by design or disaster. Either we choose our own limits or we'll have them forced upon us. Now that humankind has reached global, unparalleled power, limits to growth confront us with a question we've never faced before. Who do we want to be? And what world do we want to live in? Here's where enough comes in. If I were to describe the mantra we need in the 21st century with one word, it would be enough. Enough as in no more. This is the limit, say a planetary boundary. And enough as in sufficient, juxtaposing it to this exhausting grind for ever more, and instead invoking a notion of sharing, as in enough for each. I believe the only realistic plan to avoid breakdown and maintain global well-being lies in this mindset shift, from never enough to enough for each. Change the goal of our economic system from growth to human and ecological well-being. A well-being economy. What would that look like? We have an idea because we already pretend that's what we have. No vision statement reads, a world where growth perpetuates at all costs indefinitely. It talks about how this organization contributes to society, because that's what we feel it should do. In a well-being economy, business activities, government policies, and citizen behavior are aimed at meeting our physical, social, and spiritual needs within planetary boundaries. It doesn't mean we're anti-growth. It just means we're more selective about it. We differentiate between what should and should not grow, depending on whether it contributes to well-being. This implies different pathways towards a well-being economy for low and high-income countries. At small material footprints, growth more often correlates with well-being, including through poverty reduction. So poorer countries below their share of Earth's carrying capacity may still need green growth, economic expansion driven by clean technologies. In richer countries, what has decoupled from growth is happiness. So they can and should focus on reducing ecological footprints to sustainable levels while safeguarding everyone's livelihood by sharing more equally. Let me stress, because I hear this misconception a lot, decentering growth doesn't mean shrinking the economy until it crashes. It means reducing our environmental impact to within a safe operating space for life as we know it. That's not going back to a poorer past. That's changing the forward direction away from a cliff. We'll still have houses with fridges, good schools, healthcare, profitable businesses. We'll go to jobs and parties. But social norms and economic dynamics will change. We'll redefine what has value, or what work we call productive. With our needs securely met, this trade-off between social and environmental benefits, which we often take as given, dissolves. Sharing more equally means less income and wealth inequality, improving social cohesion, and reducing wasteful, conspicuous consumption. Efficiency gains are used to work less instead of produce more. By not pursuing growth at all costs, we can avoid a lot of costs, like all the expenditure on healthcare and cleanups due to pollution. Moving to a post-growth society isn't choosing permanent recession. It's flexing our free will to change our notion of prosperity from evermore to better. How probable is this economic transformation? It's feasible. That's half the answer. We know what promotes well-being. In fact, policies like zero tolerance on child poverty or GDP alternatives are exchanged already in WeGo, a partnership of self-proclaimed well-being governments. Dozens of cities are piloting post-growth frameworks to operate within explicit social and environmental boundaries with practices like universal basic incomes. I love how companies that put people and planet legally above profit generate billions each year. How communities are taking back stewardship of their commons with co-ops in renewable energy, water, or food. Or how recent experiments with shorter work weeks for the same pay were so successful that most of those companies made it permanent. We also have the technological capabilities, which will be pivotal once directed towards the right goal. This redirection is indispensable, but of course, I'm regularly told the techno-optimist argument that it's not, and I always respond. Let's say we could replace the dying bee colonies with robot pollinators. Why do that? If we can also advance regenerative agriculture, which doesn't cause insecticide, why dedicate our innovative powers to tree planting drones, when we can also use that thinking to redesign our economy so that existing forest isn't cut down? And that brings me to the other half of the answer to how probable a well-being economy is. It's promise. We'd have less stuff, but more of what we need. Connection. Maintaining a sense of community and purpose is hard in this current economic system, which treats us as selfish, never satisfied consumers. Research shows we're not just capable of caring for life, we derive joy and meaning from it. We can't be truly happy unless those around us thrive too. This economic transformation wouldn't be a capitulation to grim necessity. We'd want to do it even if we were not facing ecosystem collapse. Because a well-being economy fits much better who we want to be and the world we long to live in. So, we started with these global problems and found that changing our economic system is imperative, but also feasible. And no sacrifice, but simply a letting go of what's no longer serving us to find belonging in a post-growth world of embraced interdependence. If that sounds spiritual, that's what a well-being economy delivers. Physical sufficiency, social abundance, and spiritual wealth, including the peace of mind that this prosperity can last. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaya. So you spoke tonight about broader economic transformation, but what can we as individuals do?
Yes, you have to find your unique influence in the system. So that starts by changing the system's narrative. We've been told the story of separation. We are selfish, violent beings doomed to exploit our commons. So the best thing we can hope for then is technology to save us. So you would have to start by working from a different narrative. the story of interdependence, in which we are nature. Once our needs are securely met, we rejoice in contributing to this web of life that we're all part of. So you talk about bringing it back to the personal level. That's actually very emotional work. It's deeply personal. But of course, it cannot stay there. So then the next step is to build out this new narrative in the system structures. And that very much depends on where you are. If you're in a corporation, look into regenerative business models. If you're in government, look into well-being government policies. If you're an investor, see if you can transition from ESG assessments, which are relative, to the absolute assessments against social foundations and planetary boundaries. If you're an entrepreneur, look into employee ownership. Everyone, citizens, buy at not-for-profit companies. See if community solar makes sense for you. So there's so many things that you can do, but it very much depends on where you are. But there is one general piece of advice that I can give, and that's work together and remember that systems change is not linear. So people do this very disjointly at first, and then over time they build connections until a critical minority mass is reached, typically around 25% or so. And only then does the majority come along, because the system change becomes self-reinforcing. Now, there's no guarantee that that will happen for the economic transformation that I'm proposing. But if it does, it will have been because people like you and that are gathered here today contributed to that change in their own unique way. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gaya.
Hey, you're the guy who drives the gas-guzzling Escalade, right?
It may be in your best interest to switch to a hybrid vehicle.
Hey, don't worry, boss. We knocked him.
Guy's so dead we may as well call him Planet Earth.
Oh, that's a lot of blood. Go get the reusable body bag.
Please, I'll do anything to live. Hey, he says he'll do anything.
Could you solve nuclear fusion and get us out of the climate crisis?
What are you talking about? No, I can't do that. Then say hi to the coral reefs for us. Hey, this gabagool's delicious.
Yeah, what if I told you it was impossible, gabagool?
Get out of here.
So I'm looking at a budget, only 2% goes to funding national parks.
No!
Plant-based, same taste.
Hey, and guilt-free. Hey, the sun beating down makes me wish I was a solar panel.
What? We saw you growing grass not native to the area.
That could have drastic repercussions for the local ecosystem.
Or your ability to walk. Hey, by the way, what happened to your guma?
Hey, she quit recycling, so I quit her.
Oh, what? No, I thought I'm gonna be sick.
Hey, so much wind, I wish I could trade places with a turbine.
Halfway through, we thought you could use a little chuckle, right? Oh, it feels good to laugh a little bit. How about some music? A little self-introspection. Yes, yes. All right, I am so pleased to invite to the stage an incredible Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, and musician whose music is about self-discovery. She is a Phoenix native, but she lived here in Seattle for a decade. She's going to perform 2 songs. The first is May Your Kindness Remain, and the second is If I Told. Please welcome Courtney Marie Andrews.
I'm actually going to perform those in opposite order. So this is If I Told. It's a farm LA, and we're alone for the first time on Venice Beach, under the palm trees. Tell me your dreams, and I'll tell you mine. What would you say if I told you you're my last thought at the end of each night. Would you believe me? Would you even reply? Would you? Would you? Would you? Would you? I am a loner. I am stubborn. Can you handle this world I live in? And no, I can't change, but for you I'd compromise. I'd be on your side if you'd be on mine. Yes, you're anxious and you're stubborn too, but I'd learn to love the worst parts of you. Could be the former or this cheap wine, but I'm hoping that you'll reply. Would you? Would you? Would you? Would you? Is it in the stars? Is some major truth? Why did the universe draw me to you? You're so magnetic. I am hypnotized. Feels like I've known you since before this life. I hope I always see you this way. Here's to wondering if you feel the same, but I can tell your eyes meet mine, that the truth is in your reply. You do, you do. You do. You do. You do. So I did not come here to speak. I came here to play some songs, but I do want to just tell you a little bit about my relationship to the subjects tonight. And when I was about 17 years old, I was a busker. I bussed up and down the West Coast. I'm from Arizona, and I would make my way up to Seattle and back down, busking in towns. And one summer before I was hired to be a backup singer on quite a big tour, before my life completely changed, I applied to Yosemite National Park in hopes to be the entertainment for the hotel lobby. And I actually got hired, but then I ended up not taking the job because I got a job being a backup singer all around the world. But anyways, that's all to say that for me, music and nature is synonymous. And I don't think that I could have one without the other. I get my songs on walks, and both have fed me tremendously. And it's been a very harsh and hard reality to realize that what I do is not always feeding my other passion, which is the earth. And so over the course of the past few years, as a touring musician, I have implemented no water bottle policy backstage. I take as few flights as possible, and I am part of an organization which you should all look up, which is called Earth%. It is an organization for musicians, and it encourages musicians to donate 1% of their touring profits to fight climate change. And anyways, I don't know what the future looks like for musicians and for the earth. I should say that in opposite, for the earth and for the musicians roaming it. But I do know that small change can lead to small steps can lead to big change. So anyways, thanks for having me. This is a song about kindness.
Broke on a bar stool, throwing your paycheck away on overpriced booze, slots, and valet. Fortune might buy you diamonds, oh, shiny and blue, but it can't buy you happiness or love that is true. So if your money runs out and your good looks fade, may your kindness remain. Ah, may your kindness remain. So if your money runs out and your good looks fade, may your kindness remain. Oh, may your kindness remain. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. That was beautiful. So as Manoush mentioned at the top of this session, all of the content that you're seeing tonight is going to be released on TED.com, and portions of it will be incorporated into a TED Radio Hour episode. So if you want to be notified when that happens, sign up for the TED Countdown newsletter. So in this time of climate urgency, strong environmental policies are more critical than ever to facilitate real action. But how do we get candidates to prioritize long-term climate issues? It's really all starts with voters. So our next speaker is a climate democracy expert and the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. So please welcome to the TED stage, Nathaniel Stinnett.
I've worked in politics for over 20 years, and one of the biggest barriers we face when addressing the climate crisis is a lack of political will to enact all the climate solutions that we already have. Whether it's energy permitting, pollution regulation, tax codes, building codes, you name it. The reason so little is getting done is often because it's easier to win elections by ignoring the climate crisis rather than addressing it. In the United States, and that's my focus today, much of this is due to political spending by fossil fuel companies and other special interests. And currently, there just aren't enough climate voters in the United States to overcome that spending and get politicians to do what science tells us is necessary. I believe, however, that we can overcome this problem, and we can dramatically increase the number of climate voters, and that we can do so without having to convince millions of people to start caring about climate change. In fact, we may not even have to talk about climate at all. The problem is this: we don't have enough climate voters in the United States, and that's largely because millions of environmentalists don't bother to vote. For instance, in the state of Georgia, 66% of registered voters voted in the 2020 presidential election. But according to voter models, only 58% of climate voters voted. That's an 8% undervote from people who care about climate change, in a state where the election was only decided by 0.2 percentage points. Another example, in Pennsylvania and Nevada, two crucially important swing states, people who skipped the last midterm election were twice as likely to list climate as a top priority as people who said they were going to vote in that election. In short, the climate movement isn't voting. And this has a real impact on the electorate. When we look back at exit polling data from the 2020 presidential election, ultimately only 4% of voters listed climate change as their top priority. 22 midterm polls showed the same thing, 4%. And when so few voters prioritize climate change, two really important things start happening. First, it becomes incredibly hard to elect climate leaders. But second, even when climate leaders do win elections, it isn't like they can then just snap their fingers and get everything they want done. No, they still need to pick and choose what to spend their political capital on, and they ain't going to spend it on the thing that only 4% of voters list as a top priority. And here's the final reason why this lack of voter demand for climate leadership is so problematic. Politicians know whether you vote or not. That's right. Who you vote for is secret. But whether you vote or not, in the United States, that's public record. And with limited time and limited money, the most important decision any political campaign makes is who to talk to and who to ignore. And when you literally have public voter files that tell you by name and street address which people have a history of voting in the election you're trying to win, Well, who do you think political campaigns talk to? Likely voters. And who do you think they poll to figure out what issues to prioritize? Likely voters. And the non-voters, well, they get ignored. And I know that sounds cynical, but let's be honest. Does Starbucks care about people who don't drink coffee? No. Does Toyota market cars to little kids who aren't old enough to drive? No. Companies market their products to people who are likely to buy them. And politicians market themselves to people who are likely to vote. And they literally know who those voters are by name and street address because it is public record. All right. So why is this relevant to the climate movement? Because remember, when we look at the people who are voting, very few of them list climate as their top priority. But when we look at the non-voters, the people who campaigns typically ignore, well, it turns out that millions of them do care deeply about climate change. In fact, at the Environmental Voter Project, the nonprofit I founded, we estimate that as many as 8 million climate-concerned Americans skipped the 2020 presidential election. 8 million! In an election where the Electoral College was decided by just 44,000 voters in 3 states. In short, the climate movement isn't voting. And this is having a significant impact. We don't have a political persuasion problem. We have a voter turnout problem. And as frustrating as that is, I'd like to suggest to you that it's also an enormous opportunity, because we live at a moment in time where it's become almost impossible to change people's opinions about anything, but especially climate change. Yet these millions of non-voting environmentalists, they don't need their opinions changed. They just need their behavior nudged so they start voting. And I won't claim that's easy. Of course it's not easy. But it is easier. And it is also testable. Because the existence of public voter files means that you can run messaging experiments and then after the election, look up and see which ones actually got environmentalists to start voting. And so that's the focus of our work at the Environmental Voter Project. We focus on identifying millions of non-voting environmentalists and then using nonpartisan messaging to turn them into new voters and eventually consistent voters. It's a 3-step process. First, we need to find these non-voting environmentalists. Now, obviously, we can't interview every single American, but we can poll huge numbers of people, isolate the ones who list climate as their top priority, and then build highly accurate models to find other people like them. Step 2, we need to get them to start voting. And to do that, behavioral science tells us the best way to get an environmentalist to vote is not to talk about climate change. In fact, we shouldn't even try to convince them of the importance of voting. Instead, we should treat them as social animals who are trying to fit into societal norms, rather than as rational animals who need to be convinced of the value of their one vote. And so we use techniques like FOMO, fear of missing out, telling environmentalists that each year more and more of their peers are voting, so don't be left behind. Or we'll knock on their door, ask if they intend to vote. Most people will be embarrassed and they'll say yes. And then we'll follow up with them right before the election, remind them of that pledge, and equate the act of voting with whether they're an honest person who keeps their promises or not. We will even mail people copies of their personal voting histories. Yeah, pretty aggressive, huh? Well, so is the climate crisis. And this stuff works. These norm-based messages and other strategies have increased turnout among our target voters by as much as 1.8 percentage points in general elections, 3.6 percentage points in primaries, and 5.7 percentage points in local elections. And those are huge numbers in this business. I mean, 1 or 2% is everything in politics. And the final step is to build long-term voting habits. And to do that, you can't just talk to these environmentalists once every 2 years when there's a big federal election going on. No, we are active in over 250 elections each year, federal, state, and local, because yes, voting can become habitual. And remember those public voter files? Well, they're not static. Once we get an environmentalist to vote, it almost immediately becomes public record, and then dozens of campaigns race to start talking to that environmentalist because they're now a voter. And they start getting polled, too, to figure out what issues they care about. Ultimately, this is how we build an unstoppable block of climate voters that can move policymaking across the political spectrum. Because even in this hyper-partisan time, there is still one thing that unites all Democrats and Republicans. And that is, boy, do they all like winning elections. I mean, nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. So they always go where the voters are. It's just the brutal arithmetic of how democracy works. Either you go where the votes are, or you don't get to be a politician. So now it's incumbent upon us in the climate movement to build this unstoppable block of climate voters. And it's increasingly clear that we can do so without having to convince millions of people to change their minds about climate change. In fact, we may not even need to talk about climate at all. Thank you.
Million. 8 million. Did you get that one? 8 million. That's a lot of people. So to be clear, politics is something, for better or worse, is on our minds a lot today. Feels like every day these days. So let's talk about something that we don't think about a lot. Let's talk about infrastructure. These are the physical systems that surround us. Well, our next speaker says that we need to give them the attention and love that they deserve because they are actually a key way to fight climate change. Please welcome to the stage materials scientist, author, and professor of engineering at Olin College, Deb Chatra.
Thanks, Manish. I'm going to tell you about the most boring part of my day. So on a typical evening, I come home to my apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I turn on the lights, I stream music to my stereo from my phone, I head into the kitchen to make dinner. For making something like pasta, right, I would get water from the sink and I'd put it on the stove to heat up. I'd get vegetables out of the fridge, I would get olive oil, spices out of the pantry. I can have dinner on the table in about 20 minutes, I'm pretty good at this. And then it takes me maybe another 10 to clean up. Right? So that's like scraps in the garbage, wash the dishes, and I'm done. Boring, right? But here's the thing. When I come in the door and I flip that light switch, those electrons might be getting their push from a nuclear reactor, from a hydroelectricity project 1,000 miles away. The gas in my stove comes from national and local pipelines that heats my house. It also heats the hot water that I do the dishes in. And then that water drains to one of the largest wastewater treatment plants in the country and then out to Boston Harbor. So alone in my kitchen, I am a continent-spanning colossus, right? Like I am a cyborg. I have these technological systems at my literal fingertips. So these are infrastructural utilities, right? This is energy, it's fuel, it's electricity, it's water, it's sewage, it's telecommunications, it's the supply chains behind that. And these are the systems that make my life as I know it possible. And on that typical night, they're basically invisible, or at least invisible to me, right? There are thousands of people whose life and time and work and care goes into making sure these systems function. They are the real world of technology in which we all live. So Amartya Sen, he's a development economist, and he's known for studying some of the poorest communities on the planet. He made the case that the reason why we want money is usually not because we want it for its own sake, but because it gives us agency. In his words, it gives us the freedom to live the kind of life that we have reason to value. So my parents moved from India to Canada before I was born. I grew up in Canada. And I think about the way that my foremothers would have spent so much of their day getting clean water, getting fuel for cooking. And I actually think about the fact that a very large fraction of the planet, that is still true today. And that is especially true for the people who look pretty much like me, right? This is the main thing that they do with their days. The difference between my life and theirs is not so much that I have a bank account, how much I get paid. It's a lot more to do with where I am. Because my individual agency, my ability to do things in the world, is really underpinned by these shared infrastructural networks. I'm going to give you an example, because the most significant example of this is artificial light, right? So having light on demand means that you can kind of do what you want when you want to do it, right? It's a superpower. And this is what I mean by agency, right? It's that ability to act in the world. So these infrastructural networks make our life possible by bringing these resources to where we are and to where we use them. So as you heard, I'm an engineering professor. And that means I think a lot about the physical reality of the world. And, you know, one of the great truths is that energy is the thing that we need for anything to work, right? Like we pay for it in dollars, but energy is the true currency of the material world. And in many cases, the most efficient or the most powerful way to harness and distribute resources is through networks. And networks are intrinsically collective, right? So if you think about like roads and rails, they have to go somewhere. Telecommunication systems become more valuable when more and more people are connected to them. Electricity is cheaper. For thousands of years, people have had shared water supplies because if you have a bunch of people living close together, everybody needs water every day. Water flows downhill, right? So it makes sense to cooperate to build a reservoir, to build an aqueduct, to build pipelines, to bring water to where your shared community is. And of course, if you have a bunch of people living close together, the value of some kind of shared sewage treatment very quickly also becomes clear. So our infrastructural systems connect us to each other, but they also connect us to the land around us. And this is now true really on a global scale, right? So if we think about the internet, we think about mobile phones, we think about particularly sort of shipping, transportation, aviation. These are now planetary networks. And our infrastructural systems also connect us to our past and to our future, because the networks that we live in today are the physical manifestation of the values and choices that were made by people who came before us, right? It's like, what are those networks going to be? How would we use them? Who would benefit from them? And of course, who would be harmed by them? And of course, you know, we look at these networks today and we're like, that seems like a really uneven distribution of benefits, or even an unjust distribution of benefits. That's worth keeping in mind, because of course, we are the people who are now making the decisions for those who are going to come after us, right? So I think of this as infrastructural citizenship. The idea that we have a relationship to each other, actually we have a responsibility to each other that has nothing to do with what it says on our passport, but it has everything to do with the fact that we are like physical living beings that are located somewhere on the planet. So, you know, I said that infrastructure is how we get our agency, our freedom to act in the world, to do things. And it's all powered by energy, because everything is powered by energy. And that means that for most of us, most of our energy usage is then mediated. It goes through these infrastructural systems, because they shape and they enable what we can do every day. So it's things like, where does the electricity come from? How is it generated? what kind of transportation options do you have? Do you drive? Do you take public transit? Do you fly? Things like where does your water come from, or how do you heat or cool your home? So many of these physical systems then, they both enable what we can do, but they also make it really hard to do other things, to do alternatives to those things. Excuse me. And so because they sort of shape and enable what we do, it means that we can think about these systems as, excuse me, I'm just going to get some water.
One sec to catch her breath, and I'm going to use it as a moment to talk about myself. No, I'm going to tell you about the latest TED Radio Hour, which I'm really proud of. It is looking at how we are going to be eating on a warmer planet. I hung out with Sam Cass. He was the Obama's chef, and he's now become a real climate policy geek, and he throws these dinners called Last Suppers, which are as depressing as they sound, but he has a way of, like, you literally eat and then he tells you why that Georgia peach won't be a Georgia peach in the next 10 years, but then he tells you a solution. It's very cool. Then I also spent time with the Whitakers. They are a father-daughter duo who are growing rice in Arkansas, which is the #1 producer of rice in the United States. I didn't know that. You think of rice and you think of all those tiers out in fields of paddies, right, growing in lots of water. And they have actually developed a new way to grow rice that is dry so that there's less methane being released, and they hope that eventually to transform the rice industry here in the United States. They are forces to be reckoned with. If anyone can do it, they can. And then I also spent time with one of the first people who wrote papers about the idea of cultivated meat. And should I keep going?
No, we're ready.
Okay, go. Cultivated meat, which is, by the way, for sale in Singapore. Did you know that?
We had some, too.
Yeah, I had some. It was good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And there's very good reasons. It is legal here in the United States, except already the states, I can just keep going. I mean, I learned so much. You should listen to the episode. Did you want to interrupt me?
No, I was going to say tune into the episode, and we're going to hand it back to Deb in a moment.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Bye.
So, actually, this is a beautiful demonstration about sort of relying on our infrastructural system. So I'm set, my mic's set, I'm set. So, as I was saying, our infrastructural systems, basically because of the way that we use energy and because they shape and enable what we can do, it means that they also constrain the things that we can't do, right? It makes it much harder to do things that are not the things that are made possible by these systems. And what that means is, actually, this is a thing we're all familiar with, right? Because we know how hard it is to move the needle on climate change as individuals. That our individual personal decisions, like, it's hard for them to do anything because there's really no such thing as a personal carbon footprint because things go through these systems. So what that means is that we know that we need to decarbonize these systems, right? But these are physical systems that are embedded in the landscape. And that means that we need to think about these sort of landscapes as a whole. Excuse me. So as we think about decarbonizing these systems, we can think about making them resilient and transformative. The reason why this matters is that these physical systems that are embedded in our landscapes, we think of them as boring and reliable, but our landscapes, of course, have been stable. And we know that that's not the case anymore, right? Climate change, that's what climate change is. It's making our landscapes less stable. And that means, this is longer heat waves, this is stronger hurricanes, this is fires, this is flooding. Everything that we think about as extreme weather events, it's, this idea of a natural disaster, right? The thing that makes it a disaster is precisely that it's not natural, right? It's that it affects humans and human communities. We talk about the severity of natural disasters, and what we often feel that severity through the impact on infrastructural systems. So, we think about what systems go down, how long they go down for, how long it takes for them to come back up again, how big the outage is, right? And then who's affected. And because our landscapes are becoming less stable, sooner or later, the who's affected will be all of us. But we can flip this around. Because as we decarbonize these systems, as we transform them, we have the opportunity to make them resilient, to make them responsive, to make them more equitable. Our infrastructural systems, they are the most powerful tool that we have for how we can respond to climate change. And we know that we can do this, right? Because after decades of policy commitments, we've done the research, we have the renewable energy technology to transform this. We know that there's at least a pathway, and once we know that a pathway exists, we know that many pathways exist. But we can only choose to walk those pathways together, right? This is no longer an engineering problem to be solved. And this is where being an infrastructural citizen comes in, right? It's this idea that we can sort of stand together to identify and articulate the benefits of these systems, starting with the fact that they're really not economic, right? The way that these make our lives work is not just a question of, money. And that's even more true for the harms, right? That we can't think of these as sort of monetary harms, the harms that we do to each other, the harms that we do to our communities, the harms that we do to our shared ecosystem. So I said I think a lot about the physical reality, right? So the physical reality of our planet is that energy is decentralized, it's distributed, it's abundant, it's endlessly renewing. But that's not the case for matter. Our planet is mostly a closed system for matter. And we know that we're really hitting these kind of physical limits of the idea that we can take stuff out of the ground and we transform it and we consume it and then we dump those atoms somewhere else, right? Because this is what happens with CO2 in the atmosphere from fossil fuels. It's e-waste in landfills. It's microplastics in the ocean. The thing that's changed is that we can now make the decision to get off this one-way conveyor belt from extraction to pollution because we can use renewable energy to close these materials loops. And we know that we really want to do this. We actually really need to do this because what we're looking at doing is transforming the entire technological basis of human civilization, right? No biggie. So this is the work, and we are just at the beginning of this work. And that means we know we don't have all the answers. But we do know that we want infrastructural networks that embody an ethics of care and not the utilitarian calculus of harms and benefits. Because we know we don't have all the answers, we actually expect to get better answers. It makes sense for us to build out systems that are small scale, that are reversible, that are responsive, that are exploratory, and then to connect these together to make these larger networks. And they need to make sense for who they're for, because they give us the freedom to live the kind of lives that we have reason to value. We want to do this at a local scale, and we also want to do it at a global scale. Because if you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it, you also can't solve a problem if you're not thinking on the same scale as the problem, right? So this is not a do-it-yourself thing. This is about do it together, but everywhere. So in the 20th century, we built out these kind of massive monolithic systems. And I have to say, I am a fan of our charismatic megastructures. So in the US, that's the Golden Gate Bridge, the Hoover Dam, right? These were built as monuments and they were built to endure. But in the 21st century, our infrastructural systems will need to endure not like monuments, but like forests. So if you think about a forest ecosystem, it's powered by the sun, it's rooted in the earth, there's no waste, everything is basically used to grow new things. It endures, but it actually evolves and changes with time. And of course, it provides a place where all who live there can thrive. Our infrastructural systems are how we take care of each other at scale, so that we can take care of each other as individuals. They underpin our agency, and they really foster and allow us to develop our social relationships with each other. And that's especially true with things like global communications, right? That means that this is now culture on a global scale. All of these are about what it means to be human, right? And that means that a commitment to a shared infrastructural future is a commitment to our shared humanity. So this is the world that we can create together. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. So another thing that affects each and every one of us every day is food and the methane emissions associated with it. Eliminating food waste is something that most of us can agree on. But what do the people who are working on the ground, implementing solutions every day really think? Our next speaker couldn't join us in person, so we went to Brazil to visit her. I'm delighted to introduce the president of Centcoop, a network of over 1,000 waste pickers in Brazil's capital, Aline Souza.
Olá, eu sou Aline Souza, tenho 34 anos e sou catadora de materiais recicláveis. Também faço parte da terceira geração de catadoras na minha família e tenho 7 filhos. Desde os 14 anos que eu venho ajudando a minha avó no trabalho da reciclagem, ali na carroça, na cooperativa selecionando os resíduos. E também eu sei que a reciclagem é um instrumento de transformação de vida, não só da minha família, mas também de todos os catadores e catadoras que trabalham comigo na cooperativa. O manejo inadequado dos resíduos é a terceira maior fonte de geração de metano no mundo e no Brasil é a segunda maior. Historicamente, os resíduos são os maiores desafios hoje dos países do sul global. E nós, catadores, independentemente da assistência do serviço, estamos lá, executando um trabalho de coleta seletiva, onde não há um serviço formal e eficiente. Portanto, nós, catadores, estamos liderando essas ações para reduzir as emissões de metano no setor. Eu represento os catadores de Brasília no Movimento Nacional de Catadores, o MNCR. E também estou diretora-presidente da Centcoop. A Centcoop, que é a segunda maior central de cooperativas de catadores no Brasil. A gente tem aproximadamente 20 cooperativas agregadas, em torno de 1.000 catadores associados a essas cooperativas, onde 72% são mulheres, aqui em Brasília. Mas o Movimento Nacional de Catadores atua com um público estimado entre 300 mil a 1 milhão de trabalhadores. E desse percentual, 72% são assim, como eu, negros e negras. E 56% são mulheres. E essas mulheres também lideram os espaços de poder e decisão das suas cooperativas. Globalmente, estimamos que tem cerca de 20 milhões de catadores e catadoras no mundo. Embora o processo de desenvolvimento da gestão de resíduos e a sociedade tentem nos marginalizar, somos nós que fazemos a diferença na cadeia produtiva da reciclagem. Sem nós, esse sistema já estaria colapsado. No Brasil, aproximadamente 30% dos municípios apenas têm coleta seletiva. Um impacto importante para mostrar o trabalho e a competência dos catadores. E nós, catadores, somos responsáveis por 35% do total da massa coletada. Além disso, 40% dos municípios dependem exclusivamente do trabalho dos catadores e das catadoras de materiais recicláveis nessa atividade. Globalmente, somos responsáveis pela reciclagem de 58% dos plásticos. E o Brasil afirma ser líder na reciclagem de latas de alumínio. Mas como isso é possível se apenas 30% dos municípios brasileiros implantaram coleta seletiva? Eu já te respondo. Porque existem catadores de materiais recicláveis que nas ruas fazem esse trabalho e alcançam essa liderança. O mundo não está fazendo a sua parte da gestão de resíduos e na emergência climática, na velocidade que a gente precisa. Nós, catadores, estamos trabalhando de forma interligada em um sistema socioambiental nas soluções para otimizar esse impacto na nossa sociedade. Viver apenas da venda dos materiais recicláveis não é sustentável para as cooperativas, não sustenta nossas famílias e não mantém as nossas estruturas de gestão de resíduos. Então, nós devemos receber pelos serviços que prestamos para a sociedade. Os resíduos orgânicos gerados nas cidades brasileiras correspondem à metade dos resíduos gerados, mas apenas 0,5% desse total é reciclado pela compostagem hoje. Lembrando que uma grande parte desses resíduos são de desperdício alimentar, ou seja, alimentos que poderiam ainda ser consumidos, mas que são destinados para aterros e lixões, gerando aí até 2 megas de toneladas de metano no meio ambiente. E isso pode ser extrapolado para os países do sul global, onde a fração orgânica ela corresponde à metade dos resíduos gerados pela população. Durante muitas décadas, consideramos o resíduo orgânico como um contaminante, o que não é verdade, porque o que precisa é um sistema de coleta de orgânico para valorizar o tratamento dessa fração, minimizando que esses orgânicos contaminem os resíduos secos e vá parar nos aterros, né, gerando gases de efeito estufa e trabalhando na contramão dos pactos internacionais na mitigação e neutralização da emissão de gases. Assim, podemos ajudar o mundo a cumprir o compromisso global do metano, reduzindo até 30% na emissão até 2030. Na verdade, nós somos muito bons nisso. Nós sabemos envolver a sociedade, nós sabemos convencer as pessoas de separar os resíduos corretamente. Então, na parte de educação ambiental, tem que envolver os catadores e as catadoras de materiais recicláveis. Inclusive, em Brasília, a gente tem uma experiência magnífica que traz dados muito bons para a nossa categoria de credibilidade do serviço. Aqui, a coleta seletiva feita por nossas cooperativas alcança um índice maior que 80% da qualidade e eficiência dessa coleta, enquanto por empresas a gente não consegue aproveitar nem 40%. Além disso, essa seria uma verdadeira transição justa no setor de resíduos. Nós, catadores, liderando essa luta contra as emergências climáticas. A compostagem, ela gera até 3 vezes mais empregos comparada a aterros e lixões. E quando esse serviço é com os catadores, o impacto é bem maior, chega a 11 vezes mais. Portanto, direcionar financiamento climático é promover o desenvolvimento socioeconômico de todo o setor e para aqueles que mais sofrem com esses impactos climáticos e o racismo ambiental. Na verdade, já estamos fazendo isso. Aqui mesmo na nossa cooperativa, a gente está desencadeando um trabalho fundamental com a fração orgânica, que é implantar o sistema de coleta de orgânico nas feiras e aí trazendo esse resíduo para a cooperativa para a geração de compostagem. E isso pode ser acelerado de acordo com a nossa emergência de lutar contra as alterações climáticas. Somos parte da solução. Mas para isso precisamos que as cidades e o sistema financeiro nos vejam como um ator-chave nesse processo e também como protagonista, não apenas como beneficiários. Precisamos do pagamento pelo serviço que prestamos em prol da saúde da sociedade e também pela saúde do planeta durante décadas. E com isso, tenho certeza que podemos fazer muito mais. Muito obrigada.
Okay, so we have covered a range of solutions tonight. And I don't know about you, but it can feel super intimidating, right? How are we going to keep up this optimism that we might feel, imagining new possibilities, keep up the energy to actually make them a reality? Well, our final speaker has a powerful idea to sustain us. Please welcome Icelandic author, filmmaker, and sustainability leader, Hrund Gunnsteinsdóttir.
Hi. You all know that feeling, that sense of overwhelm when confronted with an urgent task, thinking if I only try better, work harder, and you put yourself aside time and time again because there are bigger things to think about. When I started working for the United Nations just after the war in Kosovo, it felt like walking into an open wound, and I was determined to give it all I had, knowing that the people who had suffered war were my priority, while my own well-being was not. In early 2002, when I was traveling for work from Kosovo to Kazakhstan, I felt this terrible pain and I started to bleed. I didn't think much of it. I just took painkillers and continued with work. It was only years later that I realized I'd had a miscarriage. And instead of this being a wake-up call, I had just kept plowing on, deepening my disconnection with my body and my emotions. Soon after, I was in the unique position of having a guaranteed job at the UN for life, which had been a dream of mine. But at the UN in Geneva, the heavy bureaucracy and hierarchy felt all-consuming. My sense of purpose got weaker, and I felt increasingly out of touch with the living world. So I left my job at the UN thinking, you know, we're serving system instead of serving people and the planet. And I thought something needed to change inside me. And I also felt our systems were out of sync. And maybe this feels familiar to some of you. Those of us who work in climate and sustainability work on transforming or changing systems. But systems don't change themselves, right? It's people like you and me that together change systems. But I don't think we can help big systems change in the long run unless we connect within, and the change starts from within us. And lucky for us, there's this beautiful Icelandic concept that can help us do that. My soul searching brought me to intuition, which in Icelandic is called insight. And in the company of some amazing colleagues, I've been able to practice, research, and interview scientists, spiritual leaders, and artists from around the world. And I've discovered that we all have intuition, and it's up to us to tune into it, which can be quite a challenge in today's world. Intuition is fundamental to our intelligence, and I don't think we give it the attention that it deserves. Unconsciously, we process a massive amount of information, sensory data that our body picks up, including the brain. While this is unconscious, it still shapes our actions. Our very focused, conscious mind can grasp only a tiny fraction of all this data processing. Intuition helps us tap into this information. It helps us read the room, come up with insights, and tune into other people and the world around us. Sometimes we dismiss intuition as an irrational impulse that we shouldn't rely on, or a woo-woo concept that hasn't been backed by science. But research shows the catalyzing role intuition has for creativity, compassion, mental agility, and the human genius. We actually need good intuition to reason well. And without intuition, there wouldn't be much innovation. A research on a group of Nobel laureates showed the key role intuition played in their discoveries. And as they shifted between analysis and intuition, it led them to their big leaps. My search for answers brought me back to my roots and helped me see with fresh eyes the Icelandic word for intuition, insight. Insight helps us reframe intuition because it brings together the scientific and the spiritual, the solid and the poetic. Insight means the sea within and refers to the ever-flowing unconscious mind. The sea within cannot be put into boxes because then it ceases to flow. Stress, work, and financial pressures can block our access to insight. And while we can't get rid of these pressures, we can learn how to clear the way to insight when we need it. Meditation and mindfulness practices can help us do that as they regulate our nervous system and we gain clarity in mind. Intuition picks up information with all our bodies. So next time you feel something's off, you get chills down your spine or a gut reaction, ask yourself, what is my unconscious trying to tell me? Insight also means to see within, to be self-aware. And one of the most powerful ways to see within is to pay attention to how you pay attention and document it. Attention journaling helps you witness how insight plays a role in your life and how best to harness it. And lastly, insight means to see from the inside out, and has to do with how we navigate the ocean of life from within with a strong inner compass. Aligning with insight is the work only you can do. And allowing insight to flow sometimes involves finding the balance between being and doing. And for many of us, it actually takes discipline to simply be and allow the world to come to us. One of the most powerful ways I've seen insight have an impact in the world is through the work of my dear friend, the ocean explorer, Henrik Sala. When we first met, he was introduced to me as the man who had left academia in order to spend most of his time in the ocean to help save it. I was intrigued, and I have since then interviewed him both for our film and my book about the role INSAE has played in his pioneering work. Anrik's childhood dream was to become a marine biologist, and after having spent 7 years as a university professor, Anrik felt as if he was writing the obituary of the ocean instead of providing a cure. So he left his job, and he went on to found the National Geographic Pristine Seas Project, where he is able to immerse himself in the ocean and explore its ecosystems in a team of scientists and filmmakers. Spending time in the ocean has helped Anrik enormously develop his intuition about what's wrong with the ocean and how to bring it back. Since 2008, Pristine Seas has been able to establish 27 of the largest marine protected areas in the world, covering an area more than twice the size of India. Anrik's story supports research that shows that intuition gets deeper and better with experience, knowledge, and expertise. Also, how we immerse ourselves in the world, consciously or unconsciously, shapes how we show up and how we navigate it. The world we live in is very much like the ocean. It's constantly changing, and we need to decide which direction to go. We're now midway into the decisive decade for climate change. We're taking stock, renewing our understanding and agency. As we wayfind and change systems, we also need to renew our focus and vision. And I think INSAE can help us in 3 ways. First, like Anrik's story shows, it helps us see the big picture and how everything is interconnected. And secondly, INSAE grounds us in the present, enables us to be more in charge of our own attention and therefore better prepared for the unexpected. And lastly, as we immerse ourselves in a given task and we connect dots beyond man-made silos, our creativity, focus, and performance improve. As we navigate towards new horizons, we need our vivid imaginations to set sails towards the possible. Grounded in INSAE's innate understanding of planetary and human interconnectedness, imagination can guide us towards the futures that we dream of. It helps us see in our minds what we intuit to be possible. Because if we can't imagine better futures, how on earth are we going to get there? Thank you.
Wow, Manoush, what a session.
Yeah. Very emotional.
It was also.
Despite the kickoff with so much data.
Let's give another round of applause to our incredible speakers and performers.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Such a treat for them to share their work and wisdom with us this evening. And a special thank you to Bloomberg Green for inviting us to join this festival. Bloomberg Green's commitment to highlighting and supporting solutions to the climate crisis is integral in this work, and we are very grateful for their continued partnership.
And we want to thank you for being here. We really appreciate you being here on a night to take all this in. It's a lot. So I want to say thank you also to the live stream. We really appreciate you tuning in. If you got a neighbor next to you, give them a little fist bump. Yeah, good job. Oh, thanks. You too. I really do sincerely hope that there's a little bit of inspiration and optimism because we need it, right? It's a long haul that we've got here, so please take what you've taken from this evening, bring it out into the world. We each have our role to play, no matter what industry we are in, no matter what background we are in, and there's a lot to be done. So thank you again so much for being here.
And have a wonderful evening.